Universidade de Brasília, por intermédio do Centro de Pesquisa e Pós-Graduação sobre as Américas da UNB, numa parceria com a Coordenação de Aperfeiçoamento de Pessoal de Nível Superior, CAPES, anuncia a abertura da Escola de Altos Estudos. Para compor a mesa de abertura, convidamos...
To the table, we invite Professor Henrique Carlos de Oliveira de Castro, coordinator of the project with the School of Higher Studies of the Center for Research and Post-Graduation on the Americas of the University of Brasilia. Professor Leonardo Barquini Rosa, General Coordinator of International Cooperation for CAPES, representing the President, Professor Jorge Almeida Guimarães. We invite the General Coordinator of Coordination of Distance Education of the Ministry of Education, Webster Spighi Cassiano, representing here the Minister of Education, Fernando Haddad. Professor Timothy Milholland, Dean of the University of Brasilia. To open, we invite the coordinator of the project for the School of Higher Studies of CEPAC, Professor Henrique Carlos de Oliveira de Castro. Good afternoon to all. I am very happy to be here at this moment when we open the School of Higher Studies, because this is a dream I've had since I joined the university in 2000 to allow the presence of Professor Ronald Inglehart, who is today one of the most important, possibly political scientists on the planet, to with us discuss the possibility of making progress in the discussion of the research world value studies that he coordinates internationally. This event, has the support of CAPES, was only made possible, and I'd like to highlight that in view of the work and the coordination and the effort of some students from this university. This is a clearly academic event and arises from a discussion on the World Value Surveys and from data from this research that a group of students had the idea in one of the courses of CEPAC to hold this seminar. People like Camila, Leo, Luge, I will not name each and every one of them, people like that, but people that made this happen. And together in this process, Data UNB, the Data Processing Center of the University of Brasilia, which I coordinate, and I have the pleasure of working with people like Ines. We worked very hard to make this possible, and I would like here publicly to thank these students because they are the reason, the motivation, and the possibility of having this event. I would like to say to the Dean of our university that he should be proud of our students. The School of Higher Studies, the first and only approved so far in the field of social studies, is the fruit of collective work of students and professors at this university. Thank you. For greetings, we will hear the coordinator of International Cooperation of CAPES, Professor Leonardo Osvaldo Barquini Rosa. Good afternoon to all. Personally, it is a great honor to be part of this table and to be part of CEPAC as a student, and I feel very at home to speak here because of the 43 projects presented in social sciences. This project was the one that had the best score from our consultants. As you know, CAPES does not assess the projects but transfers to ad hoc consultants. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I thank Professor Henrique for the opportunity and all my colleagues in this course. And in behalf of Professor Jorge Guimarães, I would like to note the importance of the School of Higher Studies in the context of the internationalization of postgraduate studies in Brazil. Internationalization of studies is something we have been seeking since 1997, when CAPES defined the criteria of assessment of courses inserted as a basic requirement for these courses to receive scores 6 and 7, which is the highest score possible. The School of Higher Studies, created in 2006, when the coordination was under the coordination of Professor Benito Schmidt, is part of this process of internationalization and strengthens this area for students and studies in Brazil. The objective of the school, as you know, is to bring to Brazil and put Brazil on the route of major international studies and scholars throughout the world. This is an example, and I'm happy to see that this auditorium is filled because all the requirements placed by the school and by the University of Brasilia have been met. I would like to thank thus the presence of all of you, and on behalf of CAPES say that it is a pleasure to hold this seminar. We hand the floor to the General Coordinator of Coordination of Distance Education of the Ministry of Education, Mr. Spingle, Professor Timothy Mulholland, Dean of the University of Brasilia, Professor Henrique Carlos de Oliveira Castro, Coordinator Leonardo Barquini Rosa. I'd like to thank you for the invitation on behalf of the Minister Fernando Haddad, the Secretary of Superior Education Arnaldo Mota, and say that on June 8, 2006, two decrees were very important and have led to a partnership with the University of Brasilia and the Ministry of Education, and CAPES Decree 5800 and 5801, which created the School of Higher Studies. If this depends on the enthusiasm of some people I talked to here, I believe that this meeting and this course will be magnificent. Leonardo has said here most of what could be said, and I believe that we will have excellent work working with Professor Inglehart. Thank you very much. With the floor, the Dean of the University of Brasilia, Professor Timothy Mulholland. Good afternoon. It is a great pleasure to participate here at this moment when the CEPAC, which we have followed these years, takes a leap in contributing. I'd like to thank the presence of Professor Leonardo Rosa, that represents CAPES, sponsoring this initiative. Dr. Webster Cassiano, representing the Ministry of Education, and tell him that the first signing of an agreement with the University of Brasilia was made with us. We knew that you needed our participation, and now we have about 1,500 students with the Brazilian Bar Association and projects for expansion. And we would like to ask CAPES for the funds for the School of Higher Studies, because we are certain that we will have many projects that will need the support. So I'd like to thank the Ministry of Education and CAPES. I would also like to greet some of our officials, in addition to Professor Henrique, the coordinator of this project, also Dr. Ivai dos Santos, the Presidency of the Republic, and our colleague at the University of Brasilia in affirmative issues, Dr. Inácio Vaz Nabat, participant of the project in Uruguay, Professor Terry Groth, who is Deputy Director of Political Institute, Professor Johnny Mora, here representing the School of Research and Post-Graduation, Professor Ronald Inglehart. The names are difficult, more than mine. A director of CEPAC, congratulations on your behalf, all the participants of this great project. The international aspect of the University of Brasilia Ministry gives this correct attention, that science is something that belongs to the world, knowledge is something that is become globalized a long time back, and the participation of the University of Brasilia still requires a lot of investment and activities in terms of partnering internationally with centers of knowledge in first world countries and also countries that may benefit from our experience and of our investments, which Brazil has been pursuing over the last decades. The effort of the School of Higher Studies comes at a good moment. I would like to greet the students that raised the idea, Professor Henrique, who followed up on it, and the ministry and other institutions that provided their support, because this is a way of no return. We must go towards and be a part of science at the global level. This is the inspiration of Vinícius Teixeira and Tassi Ribeiro, that the University of Brasilia would maintain the standard of knowledge, but looking toward international programs. That is almost a quote of what they believed in, and the effort we celebrate today with this conference. I would like to greet and welcome our speaker. Welcome. And hope that this may be the beginning of a great movement in the field of human and social sciences at the university, and also an example for other areas that will then line up at CAPES with their projects for other schools of this nature. To conclude then, I would like to wish you all an excellent conference and hope that this school may mark as it can the history of our university. Thank you and good afternoon. At this moment, we conclude the opening ceremony and thank the presence of the members. We'd like to invite to the table Professor Ronald Inglehart from the University of Michigan. We hand the floor to the coordinator, Professor Henrique de Castro. Before handing the floor to our speaker, the reason for us being here, I would like to note a educational part of this course. Most of you know that this course, in addition to the presence here, is being broadcast through the internet, both in the original language and the Portuguese version. And also CEPAC has offered a course, a distance education course for this conference, and I can happy to tell you that other students will take this conference in distance learning, and those who are registered, please pay attention to the tasks and homework that you will have. It is not just being here, this is a class. I'd also like to mention two professors from CEPAC here present, are Professor Benício Schmitz, who was the coordinator of international cooperation of CAPES, and whose effort and work allows us to hold these conferences, and Professor Elisa Nota, also a professor involved in this conference. These are examples for our university. I hand the floor to Professor Inglehart and thank him for his presence and participation here.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Enrique, the University of Brasilia, CAPES, and the Ministry of Education. I appreciate your hospitality. I think I'll... it's a little confusing to hear the Portuguese of what I've just said. It's a pleasure to be here. I have enjoyed visiting for the first time Brasilia, the now 40-year-old capital of Brazil, and visiting this university, which reminds me a bit of Stanford, where I once was a student. It's a lovely sort of tropical feeling and full of life. And I'd like to today introduce you to something that I think is a really exciting project. The World Values Survey, which, thanks to my colleagues here, has been carried out in Brazil, is, I believe, a unique, extremely exciting project. For a social scientist, I've never worked with anything as exciting as this project is. It is the first time we have ever had insight into an important aspect of what's going on in terms of having quantitative comparable measures of belief systems. Insightful social scientists have always believed, since Max Weber and Alexis de Tocqueville and others, that people's belief systems are important. And some brilliant works have dwelt on the importance of political culture, belief systems as factors shaping national character. There have been some very interesting books written about why the United States is the different, distinct society it is because of a long-standing, deeply rooted political culture that seems to shape the United States in distinctive ways. Brazil also has a unique political culture. And what's marvelous about this is, instead of requiring that you be a genius in order to probe into the soul of a people, we have quantitative measures that enable my graduate students, my undergraduates, to analyze these data and to themselves peer into the souls and hearts of peoples around the world. We have now studied, or are about to, by the end of this wave, the fifth wave of the World Values Survey, we will have studied over 90 countries containing almost 90% of the world's population. More than ever before, we can examine what's going on in the minds and hearts of people. We are able to follow it over time. We have carried out repeated waves since 1981, originally only in 24 countries, this time in 65 countries. We're building up a database that shows some extremely interesting things, fascinating things, which demonstrates what great thinkers in the past believed, and we could go all the way back to Plato as someone who believed that the beliefs of people shape their polity, their society. I don't pretend to have the intellect of Plato, but I have better data. This is quantitative data from more than 90 countries, gives us an insight into changes that are taking place, and as I'll show you today, we can demonstrate not only that different societies have different belief systems, different values, different worldviews, but that these worldviews, to an amazing degree, shape social change. In other words, we are measuring a component, the human component of social change, which I believe in 10 or 15 years, all well-informed decision makers will recognize this is something they need to know about. This is a source of insight that is up there with any well-informed decision maker today, knows his or her country's GNP per capita, knows the growth rate, fertility rate, death rate, things like this. You can't make effective policy unless you know what's going on, basically. What's going on in terms of mass beliefs and values is equally important. I say this on the basis of having done quantitative analyses where we use economic variables to predict an outcome like democracy, or how many women, what percentage of women in parliament. Very important things that are taking place now in the world. And the value systems turn out to be as powerful as the economic variables. It varies from one topic to another, but in some cases the cultural variables dominate the situation. They're a bigger influence on fertility rates, for example, than any economic variable. In other cases, largely economic cases, I would readily yield that economic variables are a more powerful predictor, but the point is not that we run a horse race to see who's ahead. The point is, this is not the whole picture. It interacts with institutions, value systems interact with economic development in a very systematic and quite exciting way, to such an extent that knowing a country's gross national product per capita is a very good first start on knowing its value system. It's by no means the whole story, but Karl Marx would be not surprised, perhaps proud to see that economic development does seem to shape values, beliefs, human behavior in predictable ways. It's not the whole story. I would clearly, in fact, the evidence that I've analyzed makes it evident, this is not the whole story, but it's a big part of the story. As a society develops economically and technologically, its value systems change in a coherent and roughly predictable way. Other factors enter into it. The institutions, even given individuals, can to some extent sometimes shape a society in lasting ways, as perhaps George Washington shaped the United States. This is one of the things that the political culture literature in the United States suggests. Values are part of an interaction between economic and technological development, institutions, and the history of a given society. Another thing we cannot leave out, which the evidence makes it quite clear we cannot neglect, is the cultural tradition of a given society. I will freely admit this is something I underestimated initially. I was interested in how economic and technological change drives value change and thus drives social change. There's plenty of support for this. I'd say this clearly is happening, but the evidence forces me to admit and to broaden my perspective of how culture changes, to acknowledge that a cultural tradition is remarkably enduring. Social change is path dependent. That is, where a culture is today reflects to a quite impressive degree where it was 100 years ago. The religious tradition, and this may go back many centuries, the religious tradition is a very important factor. The fact that a society was dominated by communist regimes has left a coherent impact on those societies that were ruled by communist regimes, which is also visible. There are the entire history of a society shapes its value system with one of the forces driving for change wherever it starts. Getting richer makes a difference. This may not cause you to fall unconscious in astonishment, but I will say the evidence makes it clear. There's a huge difference between growing up with survival unsure, with getting enough to eat uncertain, and growing up under conditions where a growing part of the world, only rather recently, countries like the United States, Sweden, Japan, Germany, and Brazil is moving toward this, but not there yet, where a large, well, even in Brazil, certainly a large share of the population grows up taking survival for granted. This is something so important. Whether survival can be taken for granted or not is so profoundly important that it shapes people's entire life strategy. They're not aware of it, which in a sense makes it all the more powerful, because if you grow up under conditions of existential insecurity, survival being unsure, this dominates your life strategy in many respects. If you grow up taking survival for granted without being aware of it, the way life appears to you is different, profoundly different, and possibilities emerge that would seem secondary. They're things you would desire, but they would not seem realistic goals. They're not things emphasized. Thus, one of the kind of things, to jump to the bottom line before I begin to go into more detailed discussion, one of the things we find is that these processes of value change in the last few decades, the last several decades, have given rise to very different types of political issues. The Marxist model of political conflict, which when I was a graduate student, that was it. When I took my prelim exams for my PhD at the University of Chicago, I studied hard, and one of the questions that I thought would probably be on the exam was, what is the basis of left and right in politics? And I knew the right answer. State ownership of industry, redistribution of income, government regulation of the economy. I gave this answer back, passed my prelims. Today, I am afraid I would not give a passing grade to a student who just said that. This is part of the story, but gender equality is probably a bigger issue than state ownership of the economy today. This is a revolutionary change. But Gender issues are a bigger part of what politics is about today than public or private ownership. A number of issues such as environmental protection, which were virtually invisible, have become major issues in the politics of given countries and in world politics. Emancipation of gays and lesbians is another very new issue which has entered the political arena recently, was not even mentioned previously, was not even something that one would talk about in polite society. Today it's a significant political issue reflecting fundamental changes in society based on changes in what people believe. Changing values, changing in a roughly predictable way. I actually have a model which in a book just published a year ago, I published what I expect to find in the current wave, which will be completed at the end of this year, the current wave of the World Value Surveys. This was published in an article in January 2006, in a book that came, no, in January 2005, and in a book that came out in late 2005 and on our website. My neck is stuck out. It will be possible to embarrass me hugely, but I wouldn't have done this if I weren't fairly confident that some of my predictions will surely be wrong.